Good evening. I am pleased to be with you tonight and to have the opportunity to introduce our guest speaker, Bridget Mosley. Bridget has been working with children for over 30 years and has a master's degree in special education, cognition, and reading disability. Bridget co-founded an online learning center called Wowza Brain, excuse me. She is a longtime partner with Parents Challenge and offers tutoring, reading assessments, and consultations to our families. We are extremely excited to have her here to share her expertise on simple reading strategies for more effective learning and studying. Welcome, Bridget.
Thank you, Aisha. I appreciate the introduction. So let's get to it. The workshop tonight is entitled Read Smarter, Not Harder, the Nuts and Bolts. Before we get started, I just would like to say I love working with parents. I'm excited to work with Parents Challenge. I've done a lot of work with homeschoolers as well, and it's just great to have this opportunity with Parents Challenge. Tonight, we're going to cover 4 techniques. One is called self-regulation. The other one is called the 4-quad vocabulary trick, making movies and space practice. So go over that with you. Before I get too far into it, I don't know about you all, but I always wonder when someone starts talking, why should I listen? So I want to just build off of what Aisha introduced a little bit and tell you a little bit more about myself. I work as an educational therapist now, so that's a little different bent than a special ed teacher. Counseling's involved, other therapies like music therapy, vision therapy, occupational therapy, even a little physical therapy is involved. It's a neat batch of tricks, if you will. I have written curriculum. I've evaluated kids. I've been in hundreds of IEPs as an advocate. I've taught teachers. I speak up at Czech every summer for their homeschooling, the regional conference there up in Denver. And I worked as a reading clinic director. So I've been doing this for over 30 years. My thought was once you hit 30, you stop counting. And I figure I've worked with over 2,000 kids now. So I have earned my stripes. Right now, I'm also online. It's called Master Books Academy. I have a course there. And on that course, there's 3-leveled reading program. I'm going to show you a QR code now, but I'll show you again later if you're interested. Some of the techniques I'm going to show you tonight are in this program as well. So we're covering some neat stuff from the program. I think the thing that gives me some of my best credibility, if you will, is that I have 2 girls, both in their 20s now, but one of my daughters really struggled. She was what we call a deep dyslexic. And I used what I'm showing you tonight, as well as many other techniques with her. And I hope you find this helpful, parents. I know this as a parent, not just as a provider. She is a senior now, about to graduate from CSU with a degree in econ and statistics. So they do make it, they do go on, despite all those struggles from time to time. The techniques I'm showing you tonight, I'm a very practical person. And what I'm trying to do is save you as much time as possible. I'm also a hands-on person, so we will actually stop and do the techniques. I want you to get what I'm talking about. I want you to feel comfortable, ask questions as I'm explaining the techniques, and if I can clarify anything. And Melissa's going to help us later break out into groups so you can try those techniques. The bottom line, if I could bottom line education, this is what I would say. I think we're losing too many kids. And unfortunately, it's not the kids' fault. Not unfortunately, but it's just not the kids' fault. What really is, it's the curricula. Too many, the curriculums are written poorly. They don't give enough review. They don't delve well enough into the vocabulary that the subject's presenting. And I'll cover tonight how you can kind of get around that. But we're just losing too many kids. And I hope you'll take some of these strategies to heart, because we really could be reaching more kids through some simple strategies. So one way to think about this, this outline tonight is we want to pump up the curriculum, if you will, give it more life, because it's again, not well written, not well thought out, but we can help our kids with it. Whether you're working with a child who's maybe reading Charlotte's Web that level right now, War and Peace, or some biochem book, what I'm going to show you tonight can be used with all of these levels. It doesn't matter. So I'm sure you noticed in the program, we were looking at about 4th grade and up. So these techniques are just like across the board type of techniques for kids. So the first one we're going to start with is called self-regulation. I wonder if many of you have heard of the term. I have learned over the years that before I try to teach a kid anything, I need to figure out what their learning state is. Do they look ready to learn? In the picture there on the screen, obviously, these kids don't look ready. They're not ready to learn. So I encourage you, as you're working with your kids, whether, homework or whatever, just stop, kind of get a read on them. A lot of times, we say our kids are misbehaving. What I would encourage you to take a little different view or angle on is whether it's stress behavior. Do you remember, I don't know, this probably dates me, but that old Gary Larson comic strip, and he would be talking to Ginger. You just scooch in here. And, he's talking to the dog, stay put, Ginger, stay in the garage, yada, yada. But what the kids hear, of course, is more of the blah, 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 Ginger, blah, blah, blah. So when they're not in the right learning state, this is what's going to be happening. This technique, it's actually out of Harvard University. A researcher came up with this. I think it's brilliant. I would say of all, I know so many techniques now. That's one of those things where I should sit down and count. Probably a couple hundred of them by now. This is one of my all-time favorites, and it's so simple. The idea is if I take a thermometer, here's mine. It's the same thing on the screen there. So if I take a thermometer, and it's a metaphor, of course, and I just approach this or parallel this to a learning state. So if you look on the screen here, that 60 to 80 degree kind of place is comfortable. And that's as far as a brain state, we call it the green. And we say to kids, you seem ready to learn, you seem focused, you're engaged. This is where we want kids. Too often though, they may be in the red. So this kind of warmer, hot, overexcited, we might say hyper aroused. Their thinking part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, shuts down. They're wasting a lot of energy. That's one of the saddest things about being in the red. A lot of energy is being used, but little is getting done. It's almost like they're running on fumes sometimes. And then we have kids who we'd say are in the blue. So to use that thermometer, below the 60 degree mark, it's uncomfortable, it's cold. These kids are shutting down. They're not giving us much eye contact. They look tired. Maybe they're coming down with a cold. Maybe they got some bad news. Maybe they had a fight with a friend or a family member. There's all kinds of reasons a kiddo might be in a blue state or the red state. But we just want to have this conversation where we're talking to them about, where are you? And are you ready to learn? And it's okay, and because it's life, right? If they say, I'm feeling kind of blue, or I'm really wound up, I feel like I'm in the red. And just to have that discussion, what would it take to get them back in the green? Right. What is in part really happening is our kids use us, especially the younger kids, to what we say co-regulate. So they're really playing off of us. They're sensing our moods, our reactions. So if we can stay calm, and I know that's sometimes easier said than done, because sometimes we need to stop ourselves and say, am I in the green? Am I ready to be with my child right now? Or, should we be doing homework right now? Should I be helping? Because maybe I'm not quite in the green yet. But I've found over the years, if we just take a few minutes to have this little discussion, this little check-in time, it can be hugely helpful. And kids, and I'm bringing this back to reading, of course, because that's the topic tonight. But with this regulated green sort of state, brain state, kids can focus better. It will improve comprehension. They can read for longer periods of time. They're more apt to read for pleasure. All those things we want to see can happen. But the learning state that a child is in is critical, and it's something I think we just tend to overlook too much, too often. It wasn't probably done for us, but that's okay. We can start now with our own kids and just talk about this self-regulation and are they in the green? I'd like to give you a chance to do this. So Melissa, if you wouldn't mind breaking people out and just jot down, or if you're with somebody there in your home that you could talk to, what learning state, where are you on that? Are you in the green right now? Maybe you've had a super hard day, maybe a hard long week, and you're kind of just dragging here. Maybe you're in the blue, maybe you're in the red, just had a little discussion with one of your children's that was a little heated. It's normal. All of us all day long are just going up and down that thermometer. And I just want you to practice this and get a chance to get a feel for this idea of what color are you, if you will. So let me give you a few minutes.
Okay, I'm gonna put you guys in groups. And then Bridget, you can jump in, you can go from group to group.
Oh, okay. Just hit the join, I assume.
So I'll go to the do you see all the rooms?
I do.
Yeah, so you can just join which room you want to go to.
Oh, neat. Thank you.
I'm just gonna move. Tamika, do you know how to go to a room?
No, I don't know how.
Okay, let me see if I can put you in a room. Okay, so you should have just been asked to go to room 2. There we go. Hey, Angela, are you there?
Hi, Melissa. Sorry, guys, I hit get out of the group and I got out of the whole thing.
Oh, that's okay. Do you want me to end the groups?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Right. So I hope you all had a good discussion. The group that I jumped into was great. And one thing we were noting, it's like, well, I'm not quite in the red or green, and it's hard to see on the screen, but there's a little bit of a yellow there. The idea that you're kind of getting cautionary and maybe moving into the red. We also talked about how within a 30-minute period, you can be over that thermometer. That's life. And things affect our moods and we change throughout any time period. But I think it's just such a good discussion to have. I think it's good for our kids to know. I really appreciated when my kids were younger, I would say to them, you know, I'm in the blue right now. And we would talk about, well, what would it take to get in the green? That's a really great discussion too. Of course, we don't want to stay in the red or the blue. Help each other out. What would be helpful for some kids? It's music. Again, it's not just the kids, it's all of us. For some people, it's music, other people exercise, prayer. I mean, we're all different, but just whatever helps you get back. And I think the big step is, you know, that you hear it a lot, these mindfulness. So we're recognizing this is where I'm at, and I need to get back into a learning state. So it's great discussion. I heard one mom say that she felt she was more in the green this week and that she was calmer with her son. And thus, basically, what she was saying is she was able to co-regulate. She was able to help him regulate by her being in the green. So that was really neat to see. I want to just encourage you in this kind of vein of self-regulation with your kids to really monitor friendships. Friendships are the brain's way of dealing with stress. It's the best ways the brain deals with stress. And really important, particularly for your older kids, middle school, high school. What happens at that point is these kids are starting to co-regulate each other. It's kind of a scary thought, but it is what's happening. So we really want to be mindful. Are our kids' friendships solid? Are they hanging with people who are going to help them make good life choices? So keep a close eye on that. That really matters during this time. I really love this technique. I consider it absolutely a life skill. This is something that kids can grow into, use on their own, help them manage the hard life choices that are inevitably coming their way, whether it's about jobs, school, all kinds of things. So this isn't obviously just about academics, but it's a good place you can start. And I'd encourage you to teach your kids this technique. It's very helpful, very powerful. This is my soapbox moment. There's so many ways our kids get dysregulated. One of the things, though, that I see a lot of and I don't understand is these papers where a teacher will just bleed all over it, is what I call it, the bloody paper. If you see this, if your kids are bringing this home, I would encourage you to speak up quietly, privately to the teacher and just say, hey, this is stressing my kid out. Can we, after maybe a few years, just put a line through it, say, I corrected this much of the paper. It's clear the student wasn't understanding the concept, and we won't just keep pointing out error. That is highly dysregulating to kids. And I'm still amazed that it's happening. So my 2 cents, me getting on the soapbox, wanting to see that stop in the schools. There is no brain research that would support that strategy. So we are now at the questions period. Does anyone have any questions about this technique? You should have, I believe I gave one to Melissa, just a picture of the thermometer, just to kind of help you remember this technique and what it's about. Melissa, I can't see any questions. Are there any coming on the screen or the like?
I don't see any questions at the chat at this time.
Okay, that's fine, and you'll have time later. It's a pretty simple technique, pretty straightforward. That's one reason I love it. But I think it's, again, we just shouldn't be jumping in on a worksheet with the kid until we first check in. Are you okay? You ready to learn? Okay, you are, great, let's go. This next technique I would encourage you to use as well. I'm not teaching this technique, I'm just going to do it with you, but here's another technique. Anytime you cover material, the brain needs a little time to review it. It's just how we're wired. So I'm actually stopping this little workshop and saying, hey, let's just stop and think about what you just heard. And one way you can do that is to what we call a recall and write down. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes. I want you, if you're a note taker, bravo, so am I, but I want you to actually put the notes away, turn it over, whatever, don't look at them, and just take out a blank sheet of paper. And I want you to write down everything you can remember about self-regulation. That was the topic in the last 10 minutes or so here. So let me just give you 2 minutes. Write down everything you can think of. See if you can remember those slides. If you can remember the pictures, you're much more likely to remember what I said, what we covered. I don't know if that was quite 2 minutes, but I think we're close enough. Let me help you review. You remember that thermometer? Were you able to write down the 3 states? Maybe you were able to write down the colors. Maybe you were able to write down the colors and what they meant. How about this term? Were you able to remember about that co-regulation? That kids really play off of us and they're taking their cues from us. And if we can stay calm, we can help them regulate. That was a neat term. And we talked about how, as parents, we get super busy and we can get riled up too. And this whole concept of self-regulation is not just for the kids, it's for all of us. So that was some of the key points. All right. So we're going to hit the next technique, and this one's called the 4 quad vocabulary cards. Again, a very simple technique I'm going to show you, very, very powerful. One of my favorites. It's like Bridget Mosley's greatest hits. I'm showing you just my top favorite techniques. So with vocabulary, this is so underrated when we work with kids. We always, I guess, assume that they're doing fine, that they know the words they need to know to read whatever, whether it's a fiction or nonfiction. We just assume they know all the words, they get it, they have that vocabulary. When I get a ed psych, these are the reports, some of your kids probably have them in the IEPs. The first thing I look at, some of those reports are massive, but the first thing I go to is the vocabulary, because I want to know where they're at. This just tells me so much about this child's brain and where they are and where we need to go. And truth be told, a lot of these kids, it's almost like a gas tank and they're basically on empty. Their vocabulary is very limited. The other day I had a student, she was about 14 and she did not understand that a dozen was 12. So there's just some general vocabulary some kids don't have, and they're really at a deficit. And so reading almost anything can become quite difficult and challenging. So we want to think about vocabulary as reading power, and spend time with kids. And I'll show you a technique in a minute, but spend time with kids, just checking, do they know the terms? And if not, let's help them learn it. One of the best ways we learn vocabulary is through reading. We actually speak at about a 4th grade level, not much higher. About 10,000 words we're all using most of the time. It's in print where we really get introduced a lot more words, and that moves us into a range of about 50,000 words. So it's very different. Once kids hit about the 4th grade, they're not going to learn nearly as many words from being in the classroom, or I don't care if their parent has a PhD. We just talk at a lower level. It's in print that kids learn vocabulary. So if the school isn't asking for that 20-minute read, a lot of them are, where they just say, I want to have your child read for 20 minutes for pleasure. Be sure that your child is. For the older kids, middle, high school, we'd really like to see that like a half hour or an hour. I know that sounds like a lot, but research supports it. Those kids do really well on their ACTs and the like, tend to find high school much easier, find post-secondary work also much easier to do. So yeah, be encouraging your kiddos to read. Here's an example. I was working with a student a few weeks ago, and he brought in his science textbook, and all these words were in a paragraph or two, and he knew not a single one of them. So of course, he had trouble comprehending the passage. So we had to back off the text, so to speak, and start working on the vocabulary. And I'll show you in a minute how we did it. But just with these, some of these subjects texts are so dense, so poorly written. They throw a term out at a kid one time and they expect them to know it. And there should be more review in there, but there's not. So we need to help our kids parse this out and figure out, well, what words do they know and don't know, so they can actually read the book, actually read the text. And sadly, this is what bothers me the most about this curricula that's written so poorly. Instead of the teacher, the child, the parent saying, hey, this book isn't really written all that well. Look at this. They introduce this word humidity one time, and now they expect you to know it, and nobody's reviewing it with you. Kids don't see that, even though that's what's happening. Instead, they believe the lie that they're stupid, and it's not. It's just poorly written curricula, and these vocabulary words are not explained well, and they're not reviewed enough. So we got these kids thinking they failed, but really what's happened here is that the curricula has failed them. So if you can think of, sort of reframe this, we're not studying science or social studies or physics. We are studying vocabulary. So whatever subject your child's working on, really just emphasize to that idea to them. Do you know all the terms that have been introduced? And I mean, really know them. And I'm going to show you a way so they can go deeper and know a term more deeply. But get them thinking about that. Do I know the vocabulary for this chapter? Do I know all these terms? If I don't, there's no way I can read it and understand it and answer questions at the end of the chapter. That's just impossible nearly. So I want to show you an easier way. If you were to send your kid to one of the learning centers, they often do this technique, but I'm glad to say it doesn't need to cost much money, and it's certainly not rocket science. So here it is. It's called the 4 quad cards. And I'm actually going to do one with you. And the term that I picked out today is called metacognition. And it's what we're doing right now. We're getting kids to think about their thinking We're getting kids to think about their feelings as well. With the last strategy with self-regulation, that's thinking about your feelings. But this one is, these techniques I'm showing you tonight are all thinking about your thinking so that you can be a better thinker. So we'll just try this word just so you can get practice on building a 4-quad card for a vocabulary word. Okay. So in the first box, you can take a piece of paper, ideally a note card, and you're just going to break it up into 4 parts. And this, again, this is just an example. You can take any word your child is studying, you know, whether it's photosynthesis, amalgamation, whatever, it doesn't matter. But you put the word and the definition in that first box. So for our word, we said it was metacognition, right? So here it is, metacognition, thinking about your thinking. Okay, now we're going to move to the second box. And in this second box, we're going to illustrate. So don't have to get fancy, stick people work fine. For our purposes, I just pulled that brain, we're thinking about another brain, that idea about we're thinking about our thinking. In another section of the workshop today, I'm going to talk to you about how kids visualize and need to visualize and build movies. So this illustration idea is really key. We need to visualize concepts. So that's that piece there, we're visualizing. In the next box, that third box, we're looking for synonyms now. So it just helps the brain learn something. If I know words I already know that are sort of like this, helps my brain learn this new word, metacognition. So in this case, the idea of self-reflection is a synonym, self-perception, being reflective, being mindful. There's a bunch of synonyms you could put there, but it's nice to put at least a few when you're building cards with your kids. And then in the last box, I'm just fascinated by this idea. We put an antonym, and the idea is we only know something really well and deeply if we know its opposite. So for this case, for the card, this idea, or the word rather, metacognition, unawareness. If you're doing something rote, that's not metacognitive. If it's kind of shallow, if you're on autopilot, if your brain's kind of half there, those are all antonyms of what it means of metacognition. And then finally, there's one last step. I have it on the bottom of that, but we actually want you to have the kids write a sentence on the back of the card. So they've got their 4 quadrants filled out. And then on the back of the card, we want them to write a sentence or 2. So I call them a sentence story, because I really, as much as possible, I want it to be short like a sentence, but I want it to be a story where the kid's in it, because that facilitates memory. That will help them remember, in this case, like, for example, what metacognition means. So story's big. So not just a sentence that's copied out of the book, but something about them that's story-like. So from an example that I pulled from myself, if I was learning this word, I wrote metacognitive strategies like the thermometer, help my students feel safer so they can learn faster. So you see how I'm in it, how it impacts me, and that just makes it easier for me to remember the term metacognition or metacognitive. So this little card, man, it is, like I said, I've seen so many books and strategies and ideas about vocabulary, and I think this one just rocks. It's so simple. It really, just vocabulary on steroids. And the beauty of it is the idea that I'm not just writing the definition. That's pretty flat, 2-dimensional. I had a professor once who always said, always make lots of door handles on the door. So the idea is it's a concept. And if I have lots of handles I could open it from different angles, then it's mine. It's that concept, I can understand it. So we'll see with the 4-quadrant cards how there's just different angles. There's the picture, there's the synonyms, there's the antonym, and then that little story on the back. So I gave that kid 5 angles or 5 door handles, if you will, on the concept of metacognition. Much richer, much more robust. for his brain to hook onto and remember what metacognition means. There are actually some apps out there that do something similar, but I would encourage the cards. They call it the IKEA effect. If I make something, even like putting IKEA furniture together is the thinking psychologically, if I had some input and I help create something, I feel ownership to it. I feel like it's mine. I remember it better. So just a little my 2 cents there. I would really go with the cards, but if you feel like your kid won't do that or would like the app, there's apps out there that do a similar thing. One more thought before we break up and try this out more. Be mindful that in math there is a lot of vocabulary. So we get really focused with kids on helping them solve problems. Let me show you this list. This was from a 5th grade math book, and I don't expect you to read it. I'm not reading it. But there's just so many terms, so many vocabulary words for this 5th grade math material. So again, especially with math, we can kind of get over-focused, hyper-focused on helping kids solve problems when we should pull back and say, do you understand what a rhombus is? Do you understand least common denominator? Tell me in your own words what that means. And if they can, it's okay. Again, a lot of the curricula is poorly written, probably what wasn't explained well and it wasn't reviewed. So as a parent, you can be a huge help and just help, your child really learn these terms deeply. Okay. Any questions about the 4-quad card?
I have a question.
Please, yeah.
Okay. It's not the quad card. It's super cool. But at the beginning, you had said something about like schools testing kiddos for vocabulary for their IEPs.
Yeah.
Is there like a name of a specific test that you suggest having your kiddo tested for as part of their IEP stuff that monitors that?
They'll often use one called the Peabody, Peabody. It's a great, well-established vocabulary test, and it really is just looking at vocabulary.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for the question. Anyone else with questions?
So do I understand correctly, this is something you can, like, you're doing it with your child, or you have them come up with it by themselves, or is it just depend on their age level?
Yeah, I think, as I'm working with my child, could be, we're reading a fiction book and we come across a word like redundant, and the context wasn't very helpful. They don't know what it is. And you know how we'll say to the kids, go look it up in the dictionary. Bad advice. Don't do that. Helping just building this card, again, we'll put redundant in that first quadrant. Draw something where there's repetition. The idea that redundant is something that didn't need to be done again. To have a little chat. Well, what can you think of a time when something happened to you and it was redundant? The synonyms, the antonyms, a story where my child's put in. So yeah, to answer your question though, it can come from so many places, but definitely, how a lot of the textbooks will bold vocabulary. That's one way to kind of, because it's not like you can sit there and read the whole chapter your kid covered that day, but just to skim it, look in the index as they're using terms, and you get the sense, do you really know what least common denominator means? Because they kind of have a handle. That's the other thing with this 4-quad card that I love is sometimes kids sort of get a concept, but if we build the card, it's a richer representation of the concept. So you can really help them fill it out more and feel more comfortable and confident as well. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Okay, we'll move on. There'll be more times. Feel free to, if you want to jump back to a concept, if you think of a question later, that's fine. We don't have to stay in each technique per se. I want to again do that 2-minute recall and write down, give you about 2 minutes. If you're a note taker, I'm proud of you. I am too, but I want you to put that away or turn it over on a blank sheet of paper. And what can you remember? We just talked about vocabulary. What do you remember about that concept? Good. So let me cue you a little bit, see if I can jog your memory a bit. Do you remember how we talked about reading? And that it's really significant at 4th grade. Kids are pretty much going to learn all the vocabulary they're going to learn for the most part from just talking, from languaging. And languaging is wonderful, and we want to be doing lots of it, especially with the little guys. And honestly, it never stops, but especially with the little guys. But once they get about that 4th grade level, it's really in these rich texts of fiction and nonfiction that they pick up that they say we want to have about 50,000 word vocabulary. So that's where they really pick it up. And we want kids reading for sure. We talked about this 4 quad strategy.
Pardon me, Bridget. I have a couple of questions.
Oh, awesome.
So the one was, what was the name of the test that you had mentioned before we took
Sure.
this break?
Sure. It's the Peabody, and it's
Okay.
spelled Peabody. It's a very well established, very well known, as far as special, testers know, vocabulary test.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And then the other question was, would you suggest working on cards during the weekend before reading new words and doing the cards? I'm assuming that this is for children who are doing weekly vocabulary tests and spelling tests at school.
Oh, yeah. Hopefully, but they say that actually vocabulary in isolation, like if I just give you a list of new words and tell you what they mean, that's actually one of the most difficult ways for the brain to learn vocabulary. So ideally, we're either in the science book or we're reading this book of fiction and they're talking about elephants and taxidermy or something. We have a context. So I would encourage, if possible, we always want to have a context around words and use them within a story or within a subject. And well, that's a good question. Like when, like if your child has to read a chapter for history and it's like, oh, this thing is dense, I could skim it really quickly or look for those bold words and make a few cards even to make it a little lighter for my child. And I'm, again, real practical person. Some of these books are so heavy and they're really college level sometimes. They're just not really appropriate. What I would want from my child is like, okay, at least I want them to get the real basic concept here. And I'm going to look through it and make sure they get maybe these 5 words. I'm sure they have these 5 vocabulary words, and they know enough about constitution, photosynthesis, whatever, that they just, at least they have just some common knowledge of it. I may not go as deep as some of these books go.
Hey, I don't know if you can hear me. Can I ask something? Hi.
Hi.
I've been using your program with my son for reading, but I hadn't even thought about it with my daughter. She's in 4th grade and she does great with reading, but she has hearing loss. And so her vocabulary has always struggled because she's not hearing the language that the rest of us are hearing. And so she struggles in math. And this is the first time it's clicking with me that it could be a vocabulary problem more than,
Probably.
because she has an A in math, but she
Yeah.
feels behind all the time. And so
Yeah.
in her IEP, we've written that I have a math book at home with us, so she doesn't have to lug it back and forth. But I work with it with her, but I haven't focused on vocabulary. So would you suggest the same type of thing for the math vocabulary as well?
Oh,
Like the 4,
yes.
okay.
Yeah, I absolutely would. It's interesting. My husband's a STEM tutor, does a lot of teaches math and of course. And I talked to him about that. I'm like, you should check and see if these kids even understand the terms. And he came back later and said, they don't. They
Mhm.
don't. And it's like, that makes sense because really every subject comes down to its vocabulary. You give me a kid with a high vocabulary, I mean, I won't even see them. That's how it is. I don't work with those kids unless there's a behavior issue. But vocabulary is just everything. Yeah, I would so zero in on that and just
Okay.
make sure. It's amazing sometimes. It's like I was telling you that young lady, 14-year-old, didn't know what a dozen was. I don't know
Mhm.
how she got through things without not knowing that. But she was definitely struggling in math, and it really showed that she just didn't even know the most basic
Yeah.
math.
Well, light bulb just went off for me. So
Oh,
hopefully
great.
this helps with her. So thank you.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Yeah, and I think it's just our tendency with math in particular. We get so focused on do your homework,
Mhm.
problem solved, but we don't pull back and say, do you even get what they're talking about? Check for understanding is what teachers do. Thank you for that question. I really appreciate that. I think that really brings it to the forefront. I do know that what I'm asking you takes time. And I wouldn't do it for every word. You don't have to. But the thing is, with all this, we call handling of the concept of the word, it really becomes the child's word. And that's when it gets exciting. It's theirs, it's mine. They don't have to revisit it necessarily because we really just stopped and explored it at a deeper level. So I'm going to have us just take a little. Oh, sorry.
I have one quick question, if that's okay.
Oh, please.
So I know you had said that like it's better for kiddos to learn the language like in the context of their books. So my son, who's in 5th grade, he has an IEP. He does do very well in math, like he has a mathematically inclined kind of brain. He's got a handful of different reading disabilities. So whenever reading gets added to things, that's where the struggle comes in. Would it be beneficial, like, because he can't do this system real time in school by himself, I'm assuming. I'll talk to his teacher about it. But if I were to like just have the teacher send home like the kind of new vocabulary and his subjects that's going to be introduced, and even though he won't be learning them in the context of the textbook in real time, to just kind of preemptively do it.
Oh, I think that's a fantastic idea. We call that pre-teaching. And the thing, Jasmine, you could do to give it some context is watch a YouTube video on, I don't know, humidity, whatever, mitochondria, whatever the concepts being taught. Yeah, that would be wonderful and not hard for teacher. I mean, it's already in their write-ups in their lesson plans. They know the vocabulary they're going to teach well in advance. That's a great idea.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a wonderful idea, Jasmine. And that's in a lot of IEPs to pre-teach concepts or pre-exposure. And obviously, one of the best things we can do for kids is this vocabulary again. And if we could pre-teach some of the terms and always with vocabulary in isolation, man, you are loading that brain. Give it a story, give it context, and it's just much more likely your child will understand the word and recall it when they need it as well. Great. Any other questions before we take about a 5-minute break?
I have a quick question, and I don't know if it really ties into this or not, but maybe you have an idea. My son is in 7th grade and he hates reading. He hates it. And I don't really understand why. He thinks it's a punishment. Every time I tell him he needs to read, or, because I try to have him read at least some every day, but he really considers it a punishment. Do you have any like ideas on how I can make it less of a punishment for him?
Yeah, I respect what he's telling you and I believe him, and it saddens me. I'm a reading teacher at heart. I think he's probably telling you, and what's probably happening is he's a very slow reader. Do you know what his word per minute is by chance? Has he been dibbled lately? 7th grade, they kind of stop sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know what his per minute. I know that all of the assessments that the school does say he's within normal range, but I don't know what the specific per minute is now.
Yeah, and I was going to say at that grade, they rarely check, but he should. At 7th grade, we like to see kids at about 160 words per minute. You could check him. So anything he's bringing home, technically, he should be able to read at that speed. My guess, he's probably reading maybe at 100, just significantly lower. This makes reading a very laborious task. We actually speak at about 140 words per minute. So it's coming in real slow. He's working really hard. That's what he's really saying. And punishment is, Mom, this just feels so heavy. And it is for him. Can he get on some audiobooks? Has that been talked about?
I can talk to the teachers and see if they will allow audiobooks for the reading, because he's asked me about it, but I'm like, no, you can read it, but it might be better for him. I mean, it might help him, encourage him to want to read more, at least listen.
Yeah.
But I'll ask the teachers if they will allow him to do audiobooks.
They should. If he's got an IEP, that's a very reasonable accommodation. And I cannot imagine them saying no, or we can't. That's just, no, we can.
Well, he doesn't have an IEP.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So, he's never needed one. He's always done pretty well in school. I mean, he gets A's and B's on everything. He does really well. He just really hates to read. So,
and there are some folks like that. It's just very heavy. With practice, you can get kids more fluent and can become lighter. You might, I don't want to sales pitch here, but the program I wrote, the last level of it's called Brain Connected Reading, and it's exactly for kids like that. Kids who hate reading. You can read, they can read chapter books, but they hate it. And a lot of it is building fluency, working memory, and thinking speed. But it takes significant commitment and work, but you can work these kids up. But in the meantime, I'd absolutely look at audiobooks. And most of the textbooks now, lots of the fiction. There's Libby and gosh, I'm blocking the other two. Oh, it'll come. I'll remember later, and I'll get back on and say what they are. But yeah, it's wonderful. And thank you for bringing this up, because when I say I want kids reading, I'm thrilled if they're on an audiobook. I am thrilled because, again, it's just someone reading it to them, but the vocabulary is there. So if your kid is not a big reader, see if they'll listen to audiobooks. It's really the same thing. They will build their vocabulary.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. That reminded me, I should have had a slide about that, honestly. I just do this so often, I forget sometimes. But yeah, audiobooks are the equivalent of a book. As far as brain is concerned, they're equal. And I absolutely can build vocabulary with audiobooks. So
Okay.
with my students, in my private practice, that's one thing I always ask. What audiobook are we listening to? Because I want them to constantly be hearing language and build their vocabulary. And I love going into what kids want to become an expert at. That's perfectly fine. That's a great place to start with audiobooks. Whatever they're interested in, you know, sports, whatever. If it's a great start to just get them to love or at least tolerate audiobooks.
Okay. Thank you. And I am going to look into your program as well, because it might
Okay.
be beneficial for him. And is that in our handouts? The
Yeah,
I
and
can
I'll
come in?
at the end, I'll show a QR code
Okay.
for it. Yeah,
Okay. Thank you.
pleasure. And I see a hand up with Crystal. Are you able to?
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting my
No
phone.
problem.
I just was wanting to ask if you had any suggestions for audiobooks for fourth graders.
Oh, there's a wonderful website. It's called Lexile, and that's LEXILE.com. Oh, I love this website. It has a million books. I don't know, it's crazy. And they have leveled everything. So it's great if you are like, your kid brings something home and you think, I think this is too easy for his grade level or too hard. You can go on lexile.com, write in the title, it will punch back a number, and then on that number you have to convert it to a grade level, but it's easy to do because they have a chart there. But it would tell you, oh, that's fifth grade level book. So if you want to look for fourth grade books, audiobooks, I would say go to lexile.com, punch in that level. I'm trying to remember, fourth grade's about an 800. I can look on my chart, but they say 800 Lexile. If you buy books lately and you flip it over, they'll actually have the Lexile level. It's becoming much more common now, where it levels the books. And then the beautiful thing about Lexile is you can filter. So if your child is interested in, you know, computers or dancing, whatever, or a particular genre, mysteries, whatever, you can filter that and it will give you all kinds of titles, and then you can, you know, pull a few off, you know, see what the library has. So it's just a great way if you really want to kind of zone in at a certain level. Lexile.com. I recommend this to parents, free website. I recommend this to parents all the time because as your kid's moving through the grades, it does. I remember my daughters bringing things home and thinking, I think I read this, and you know, they were in high school. I think I read this in college. It's a bit much, and it was just nice to be able to tell them, yeah, this is actually a college level book and you're doing great. Of course you're going to find it challenging. You're a sophomore in high school. So, but I could with authority say to them, no, this is a college level book. Lexile says so. Great website. Great. Well, why don't we take about, say, 5 minutes? What have I got here? 7:01, so 7 o'clock. So in about 5 minutes, we'll get back on, but everybody go ahead and take a break. Brains need and love breaks. So encourage you to get, you can even get out of your chair. Awesome, Kim, exclamation point. Really looking forward to it. My friend. Okay, it was nice to have a little break, huh? I encourage you when you're working with your kids, watch that. Sometimes we can, I know I can be a pretty hyper-focused person. Watch that with your kids, take breaks. Some of the researchers, I like this one, whatever age your kid is, that's how much they can focus. So if you have a 10-year-old, they can focus for 10 minutes. I don't know, we got to get more done than that, but bottom line is breaks are very important for the brain, helps us stay focused longer, get more done. So back to the talk here, we're on the third technique now, and this one's called making movies. Again, I'm just showing you the very best that I've uncovered, if you will, over 30 years of teaching. This one is extraordinary. I wish, like when I learned it, it was a semester-long course. I can't even imagine how many hours I put into this. I'm just giving you a crash course, but the concept is very useful. And there is definitely some takeaways that you can have and use with your kids. So crash course, but well worth your time. So you know the idiom, how they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. This is so true. And I'm going to stop a second. Do you remember this term we learned? Raise a hand if anybody remembers. And I'm showing you a technique that I'm going to show you. Hey, there's somebody. Way to go, Heather. There's a technique that I'm going to show you after this one. It's called space practice, and I'm just doing it right now. The idea is if I teach something, in a few minutes, I want to review it, even though I'm in the middle of something else. So this was metacognition, thinking about your thinking. So if you were able to pull that out, bravo. If you weren't, that's okay. It's just your brain saying, I need more reviews. So I'll cover this again, but let me get back. So this idea of making movies, that was almost like a commercial. So this idea of making movies is so critical. Einstein famously said, if I can't picture it, I can't understand it. So I'm thinking if he needs to visualize, we do too. There's what they've learned through fMRIs and the like, and the brain researchers, is that the 75%, if you will, of our real estate of brain, of the gray matter, white matter, is dedicated to visualizing. So when someone says to you, I'm an auditory learner, or somebody's kind of using that paradigm, truth is we're all visual. That's just how we are created, how we are wired. We are visual people. So we have to help kids think visually And I'm going to show you a technique called making movies to help them with that. But just I wanted to give you a little background that this is well researched. And this idea that somebody can be auditory or kinesthetic, it just doesn't fly anymore. We're visual. Not to say that we don't want to hear something or get our hands on something, but ultimately, if we cannot visualize a concept, we truly cannot fully understand it. So you'll see faces like this. Do you recognize this face? This happens a lot with my work. I'll get a kid about this age, 9th grade, say, and he can read the text just fine, beautifully sometimes, quite fluent. We say that he has prosody. It's like a storyteller's voice. But then when you start to ask him, well, what was it about? And some, give me some details, give me the sequence of events. Just this blank look didn't really pick up anything. And sadly, with these kids, what they've learned to do is to reread something maybe 3 or 4 times. That helps a little bit, but not very much. And it's a very inefficient way to read. So we want to help kids, again, be good readers, smart readers. And what a good reader does is basically make a movie in their head. So the brain, what we know about the brain is if I can see it, then I can store it in all that 75% of my brain that's dedicated to vision. I can process it, I can think about it, I can manipulate it, but I have to have it. Sometimes we talk about our mind's eye. That's what we're talking about here, when I can just visualize in my head what something looks like. So you'll notice on my slides, for example, I don't use many words because I know that's not very helpful to you. I use lots and lots of pictures because that's how your brain is thinking. That's how your brain will take in this information. That's how your brain will remember this information. We want lots and lots of visuals. Little plug for YouTube on some of those videos. Like Khan Academy and the like, they really have done a good job. They have made concepts very visual for kids. So there's some really good YouTube videos out there. But anytime someone's teaching and they're trying to be visual, that's good teaching. That fits with how our brain is wired. The other thing about this strategy that I love is that it's not just for comprehension, for reading. It really, if I can visualize something, I'm going to be a better speaker. I'm going to be a better writer. I'm going to be a better thinker. So this making movies techniques, I really encourage you to play with it. It helps kids think and think better. So not even, it's just such a rich technique. I use it a lot with my private students because it's so rich, it's so efficient. So don't be fooled. A lot of books, they'll say, build your child's comprehension. They read a story and then they answer questions. This does not build comprehension. Answering questions will simply tell you whether they understood it. Answering questions is an assessment. It does not help a kid become a better reader. Just reading alone doesn't necessarily make me a better reader if I can't see, if I can't make pictures of what's happening. It's unfortunate. A lot of kids, and I guess I would say a lot, I've seen a lot of kids who are labeled ADHD. Pardon me, I hit the button by mistake. ADHD or learning disabled or weak memory, weak working memory, some of these labels the kids get. Really, it's not that they have ADHD, because if they can focus on something else and have laser focus, is that truly ADHD? Have you noticed that selective attention? What I think is happening for a lot of kids is they cannot visualize what's either being said by the teacher, what they're reading, however the information's coming in. They can't visualize. There's nothing for me to do, so they go find something and they look inattentive. But really what the issue is they have trouble visualizing, and it's not ADHD. So I'm just kind of throwing that out to give like the big picture about how important it is that we help our kids learn this technique to visualize what they're reading, what they're thinking about. So when we ask kids, what did you read about? And we get this look, that's a good start for having and building a movie in my head. But these, the sheet that you got look like this. That sheet can help you have this conversation with your child so you can help them build a movie while they're reading. So we're going to go over this technique, making movies. We'll break out into groups because I'd like you to try this, but first we'll do one together and then we'll break out in the groups. Sorry, don't want to get out of sequence there. So this is the story we're going to read. Pull out that sheet if you have it. That'll be helpful. Ultimately, if you want to try this technique, ideally you would print it on cardstock. So you have the template now and you could print it out on cardstock or write it on an index card. It's just nice to have each question, and I'll go over this with you, but to have each question on a single card. I just gave you this sheet so you would have all the cards on one sheet, but that's what we're looking for. So, sorry, I've got a double slide there. So this is the text that we're going to read. I'll let you read it. It's a second grade one. I just wanted something simple so we could just use it as an example. So let me give you just a couple minutes to read this little story. Okay, so simple story. This is considered a second grade, 5th month passage if you're just curious. Super simple, but it just gives us something to work off of. So what I want to do, let me get my laser here. These questions here, sorry, it's not. Here we go. So these questions here, 1 through 6, this column, these are considered more basic. The questions in the right column are a little more sophisticated. Well, I'll probably walk you through it. But if you were even to do these first column, these 6 words, and ask your kiddo questions about this as they're reading it, it would so help them comprehend whatever it is they're reading. One of the beauties of this technique is I don't even necessarily have to have read the novel that they're reading. I can still ask questions. And if my child can't answer, it just lets me know, okay, comprehension may be a concern here. I can, by asking them questions, I can help them think through the story better, maybe go back and reference it and look for it, maybe do a little deeper read in some sections, but I don't necessarily need to have read the chapter in the book my child's reading to be able to be helpful and help her create a visual. So the first question I might ask, one of my kids is, well, what was this about? Typically they'll respond back to me, it was about Frank. It's like, okay, that's a good start. Then you notice these I would say what we call visual questions. So I can ask these things of them to get them to talk more and make a movie as they're reading. So I might say to them, well, what was Frank wearing? And it doesn't say, so it's okay. We want the brain to fill in things even as much as possible. We want a really rich, robust movie. So as I was reading along, or as they're reading along there, and that first phrase was let me go back. Yeah, my name is Frank. It was my first day of school. So I just wanted to get off the bat to get this image of a kid. And since it's first day, I'm guessing he looks kind of spiffy today, maybe button down shirt and some nice pants. I don't know. It doesn't matter. the text doesn't say so. I can infer, since it was the first day, maybe he dressed up a little bit. But the idea is I'm like the director in my head. I get to create this amazing movie. And the richer my movie is, the easier it will be for me to remember, to enjoy, to continue reading, to, if I'm asked by my teacher, say, to write a short essay about something I read, it's so much easier for me to do that if I'm visualizing. A lot of the kids I work with, if I start asking them, what does Frank look like? They just look at me like I'm nuts. You know, this has never occurred to them that that's their job, that they're supposed to be creating a movie in their head. And so I always stress to the kids, no, that's the fun part of reading. And if it doesn't say what kind of shirt he has on, you can put whatever shirt you want on him. You know, it's just, that's the fun part of reading. So I might say, okay, well, what size the table, you know how they sat at a table? What size was the table? Was it like a kitchen table, a big cafeteria table? I might ask him that. It says he sat with Ben and Linda, so I might say, well, what color shirt did Linda have on? I might say, well, it sounds like they were in the cafeteria. How many kids were there around them? Were there a bunch of kids at the table, or was it just them? What did you see as you read? Shape. I don't know. What was the shape of the table? So you can see there's so many angles I could go off. There's no one right way. But if we can just help kids understand, hey, this is your job. It's actually really fun. It's what makes reading fun, is you get to create your own movie. The last question down there is where. So I might say, well, where are they? Are they in the Midwest, on the East Coast? I can ask these questions. Again, it's not in the text. They don't necessarily have to have an answer for me on everything, but I'm just encouraging their brains to, hey, there's so much you could do here as you build your movie. Think about more variables, fill in the blank, if you will, where the story doesn't, so that, again, it's more memorable. And your comprehension improves greatly. They say with this technique, I probably should have started with this, but that you can improve your comprehension by 50%. That's crazy. That's just so huge. There's so many different reading techniques out there, but I don't think any of them claim what this particular one, this making movies, claims about 50% increased comprehension. So this would probably be a good point. I've covered a lot just to take. Anybody have questions so far? I can go on to the other words about this idea of building a movie.
Yes, the website that you had mentioned earlier, would you mind spelling that out so that we can capture that information?
Absolutely. That was Lexile, LEXILE.com. And that's the site where I swear, I think they have 1 million books, and they have leveled them all. That's the beauty. So if you find a book that your child likes, say it's, I don't know, 750 Lexile, you can punch that number back into the website, and then it will spit out hundreds of books at that very level. So that's another great thing about Lexile, but it's just a readability site, and it will let you know what levels. And the mom was asking, well, what about 4th grade audiobooks? And I'm like, oh, go to Lexile and look at some 4th grade level material and use those filters.
Thank you.
Any questions so far about making movies? I remember when I learned this technique, it was mind-blowing. I just thought, I think one of my first thoughts was, of course, but I just had, no one had, and by this time I was in graduate school, no one had ever really explained it that way. I know I was making movies. I just didn't realize it. And when I think of all the kids I've worked with over the years, again, this is one of the most powerful techniques. I think a lot of people don't realize that's really what we're doing when we're reading is we're making a movie. So even to have this discussion, even, you may look at these cards and just say, I don't have time for that right now. But even the next time you chat with your child about something they're reading, particularly fiction, I think is easier to talk about, to just say, did you make a movie? What did you see when you read that last paragraph or something? Or certainly can do this with audiobooks too. What did you see? What did you visualize? To even have that kind of basic conversation would be wonderful with a child.
Did you have any handouts or supplemental material that you wanted to provide to the participants, or?
Yeah, I had sent that out earlier to Melissa. There were several sheets. Did those get out?
They were uploaded and banned.
Okay.
Okay. I had one of the participants asking, so I'll make sure that
Okay, yeah, and if I remember correctly, you had this, the making movie words. And there was the 4-quad card. And we're gonna do this in a little bit, but this idea of space practice, when to review material. And there's
Yeah, they're all on everyone's bands,
Okay.
where the link to the session was posted and the reminder. So just scroll down and you'll see all the handouts.
great.
I just wanted to say, I don't know if you guys can hear me, but this is really helpful information, even for me, because I'm a slower reader. I have a really hard time comprehending what I read. Just like you said, you asked me what the story was about, and I'll be like, I don't know. So these are really great tips, and I appreciate you sharing this with us.
Oh, thank you. And I appreciate you saying it's not just for kids. And that's why I love this. My angle is cognition in the brain. And most of the stuff I teach, honestly, about 2nd or 3rd grade, even. I've taught this to 2nd graders, just in grandmas. It just really doesn't matter. It's
Absolutely.
a technique, and it's critical for any reader. And I know even for myself, I mean, I've taught this for decades, but I catch myself sometimes thinking, I didn't make a movie even, or it was a really poor movie. I got to go back and read that. And
Right.
kind of remind myself, oh, make your dang movie. You get tired, but it's just such a great technique. Yeah, this one's gold. This one is just gold. Yeah. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions about making movies? I'm gonna skip. I had us another one that we could read, but just for time's sake, I didn't think we'd get to this, so I'm just gonna skip through this. But just remember, when you're making these movies, and again, it's not just for reading. Say you're a college student yourself and you're listening to a lecture. As that person is lecturing, you should be making a movie. And yeah, they've got their slides, which is helpful. But especially when they're off slide and they're just kind of talking, good listeners are making movies as well. So powerful technique. This does take practice. I don't know, it's our culture. I had a mom in my office the other day, and it was this very technique. And I think they'd probably spent 6 hours on it at this point. And mom was kind of exasperated with me and said, I don't see a difference. It's not working. And it's like, oh, this stuff takes time. The research on this particular technique says you can expect to do like 50 to 100 hours. But again, the good thing is we're talking to our kids all the time. And even to ask them, what was your movie like? What did you see? Like, say Goldilocks and the Three Bears, or, whatever. What was Goldilocks wearing? They tell you. And then it's fun. You come back and you say, oh, well, my Goldilocks describe what she was wearing. That's another critical skill that kids will learn by this conversation, because one of the things we're teaching a child is theory of mind, which is no two people have the same mental representation. So even as we're having this conversation, or we're reading this book, no two people read it, hear it exactly the same way. So it's a wonderful, rich conversation to simply say to a child, what'd you see? What happened in your movie? And then ask some specific questions and then compare it with your movie. Super, super rich conversation to have at the dinner table if you can. So do be patient. This stuff takes practice. When I say that word, I think people think I'm saying kale. I'm not. It's just something you do. This is the face I get often, but I'm just being real with you. This takes practice. It's not going to happen overnight. Okay. Any questions? I know I asked earlier. I just wasn't sure it's hard to be on Zoom. I'm used to real life workshops, so I'm not getting much visuals here. But if you do, please let me know. Or comments. I really appreciate the last comment about how this is, again, so much of this stuff, if it's good for kids, it's often good for us too. The brain is brain.
I have a question, but I don't know if it's maybe like more of a specific, like I should contact you later in the week, one-on-one kind of question, or a general question. So if it's not good for the group, I can shelf it and contact you later. I have a third grader who he is super proficient in reading. He's reading probably close to like a 6th grade level. Loves reading, totally into books. He despises writing, and it just leads to meltdowns every day in school, and then the work gets sent home, and then meltdowns at home. Would some of these strategies parallel for writing, or are they really kind of more specific to just the reading part?
Interesting question. Yeah, usually with writing, it can be a retrieval issue, or a fine motor. Sometimes both, which is more complicated. With your child, would you say, do you know
So
any?
academically, he's fine. There might be some fine motor stuff there in the sense that he only was in school for about 9 weeks in person his kindergarten year, and for maybe about half the year his 1st grade year. So he and the rest of his classmates lost like 2 years of that kind of fundamental writing,
Yeah.
So there's some of it. Academically, though, like what he writes is at the top of his class. It seems to be more of like an emotional blockade than anything else. And so we're really struggling to try to find ways to like help him. So I didn't know if, like, I was thinking through the movie thing, if I like maybe told him to make the movie in his head first and then write it, kind of stuff, just
my
thing.
Yeah, Jasmine, that's a great idea. Just talking it through with you might just calm him down a little bit, might make the load of writing feel lighter because he's spoken it now. It'd be worth trying. And then, yeah, I have other techniques, but I none of these quite fit.
Okay. I'll just reach out to you at another time.
Yeah,
I don't want to dominate the conversation about a very niche thing.
To me, this is my favorite part of workshops, is when moms ask specific questions about their kids. That's what I'm here for. I mean, I'm trying to certainly teach as well, but I really love the questions. So thank you.
Thank you.
Let's do our 2-minute recall again. Again, if you took notes, you get a star, but turn the paper over, blank sheet. Can you pull out, the concept was making movies. What can you remember? Because what happens is when we learn something, we're filing it away. And now I'm saying, okay, can you go find the file now? I know the file's in there. It's in my head too. It can be so frustrating when you can't find the dang file. And I'm giving your brain a chance to go get the file that you just filed not too long ago. It's still fairly fresh. And if you bring it out now, as opposed to waiting till tomorrow, next week, it's much more likely that you'll remember what we talked about today and actually be able to use it. So just write down what you can remember about making movies. And just for the sake of time, I am going to cut us a little short, but this is another technique. I've embedded it and I've taught you by just having you do it. But this is another fantastic technique that I've learned over the years. One of the gold techniques I like to think of. So often, like when your kids are studying, teach them to stop for a few minutes. Like say they just read a section of the book, a chapter, it should probably be before the chapter, but just stop for a second, close the book, and just see how much they can pull out now. This is what they call building a memory trace. And if I build the trace, if I make it thicker by pulling it out every now and then, especially after I've just covered it a few minutes ago, it really becomes mine. It won't, the Teflon brain, it won't just slide off. Because I retrieved it, it helps me remember. So that's what we're doing right now, this 2-minute recall write down. Great technique. Great technique. So we said with making movies, it's really captured in the idiom that a picture is worth 1,000 words. If I can look at a picture in a second, I have so much information. If I had to read the same thing that was represented in the picture, could take me 5-10 minutes, but in a picture, in just a split second, I have my image. So we know imagery, visualizing, very, very powerful. And we want the brain, we want our kids to be making movies, to use that imagination, use that visualization as they're reading. We talked about 6 of the words just because of time's sake. But again, if you were to cover just those 6 even, play around if you wanted to. You could ask more questions from the other cards as well. And then we talked about, gosh, nothing good is really quick or easy, is it? It's going to take time. So if you want to try this technique and the other ones too, just don't try it once or twice. I implore you. I just get that happening so much. I think it's our culture and our times. We're just so, drive through McDonald's, we want it in a second. And it's just like, that's just not how the brain works. That's not how kids grow. There has to be a lot of reps for growth. So that was the making movies. Let me move on. How many of you remember the word? Anybody? When you look at that, great, I see a couple of hands. And again, I'm asking you, go back in your head, go find that file, pull it out again. I swear to you, some of you will know metacognition. Tomorrow morning, if someone were to ask you, what's metacognition? You'd be like, oh, it's thinking about your thinking. No problem. So I just did a space practice with you. So this is the last technique called space practice. Again, one of my all-time favorite techniques. When kids are reading and learning and having poor comprehension, a lot of times what is happening is they're just not reviewing the material enough. So that's why I'm bringing this idea of review into a talk about reading. If you were to go to some fancy pants learning center, they would cover this. I understand they do this. I read at Harvard at their learning center. They talk about space practice. So if you know if Harvard's doing it, it's probably worth doing it. I love this quote. It's not just what you know, but how you practice that determines how well learning serves you later. And this is so true. And so I'm going to talk to you about space practice, about when do you practice? When do you review? They've done lots of research on this. Unfortunately, it hasn't been written into the curricula. A lot of teachers are not familiar with this technique. And it's a shame because it's simple and it's so helpful. So this is a question I get all the time. FAQ for me. I went over long division, say, and he knew it perfectly yesterday, but today he's looking at me like I have 2 heads. What's wrong with my kid? And the truth is nothing. There's nothing wrong with your kid. It's just they whip through it one time and they expect kids to know it a lot of times. So I hope that's a takeaway for you all. I don't know why we're impressed with the curricula. that's out there. Most of it, not all, but in my opinion, most of it is very poorly written. It does not follow what we know about the brain, about what we know about memory and learning and focus and motivation. Doesn't follow it at all. The books really don't look that much different than they did 10, 20 years ago. And that's unfortunate because we know more now. This space practice theory, just a little history lesson really quick. It came from a dude named Ebbinghaus, and he called it the forgetting curve. He came up with this in the late 19th century. So it's really old. It's been around forever. And he figured out when we start forgetting. And one of the key points is after 20 minutes, do you see that on the curve? You've already forgotten almost half of what you quote learned. So we forget, sadly, so fast, so quickly, so well. We're kind of efficient forgetters is what most of us are. And so this technique I'm going to show you speaks back to that, pokes back at it, tries to address this quick forgetting that we're all prone to. You know how in the 4 quad I said to you, if you know the opposite of something, you know it better. So that's why I have this slide up. The idea of, well, the opposite of space practice would be cramming. And we all know what cramming is, right? Because we've all done it, where you sit down one time, maybe twice, the night before the test, you stay up really late drinking those energy drinks, and you just try to shove it in your brain. You might remember some and enough to pass the test, but you will not remember enough later. And as courses build on each other, you're in a bad place. You're in a very bad place if you relied on cramming. So we want to teach kids to get away from that technique and do this thing called space practice. The best thing, again, you know how I've keep saying about the filing, that's basically what the brain does. Every time it gets a piece of information, files it away. If I don't pull that piece of information out pretty soon, it's gone. I don't remember. I can't find the file. They would say technically it's in there somewhere, but I can't find it, so it's useless to me. So that's one way to think about it. I'm old, so I like paper files. For you young moms, maybe the computer image of files in a computer make more sense. Regardless, same idea. I love this technique. They say, so they've done research on this, if you use space practice, you can cut learning a second language by half. You could learn it, so you could learn it twice as fast as someone who's not using the technique. Very powerful technique. I love it because it doesn't matter what subject you're working on. It just doesn't matter. It's about when do I review whatever it is I'm learning. So you should have this sheet, and you'll notice these intervals that are happening here. Did you notice how I keep bringing up metacognition? I let some time pass, and then I ask you, what's I show you the picture actually. What is that about? And you go and you have to pull it out again. I didn't quite follow this schedule, and that's okay. This is like the ideal. But if you can just frequently review a term that you're learning. So you'll notice it's a really interesting schedule. A minute later, who does this? Certainly not the curricula, not most teachers. A minute after introducing a term like metacognition, we should stop and review it. That would be really kind to our brains, very brain friendly. Then the research suggests 5 minutes later, 20 minutes later, 2 hours. I threw this one in because there's research to support this. Just before bed, if there's something I'm trying to learn, and again, I love this because this is great. If any of you moms, dads are taking a course, this is great for you. This is not just for the kids. Anybody learning anything, this is a powerful way, so you don't have to study as long, and you really get the material. And as I said earlier, so much of what makes learning hard is it builds on itself. And if I don't get a good foundation with some of these key terms, and they keep building on it, it just seems to collapse after a while. And I'm stuck in the water, stuck in the mud. So fabulous, fabulous technique. So a lot of times parents say to me, well, it didn't seem like we needed to review. They had it. And it's like, well, yeah, you just taught it or they just read something. It's still out. It hasn't been filed away. So you're basically telling me they can see the file. And it's like, yeah, but that doesn't mean they can remember where they put it and be able to pull it out later. So this research is saying, hey, we got to review with kids the very day they learn this concept. Not like most curricula, wait 24 hours at best. That's a good curricula because, they don't get to see them that evening, the teachers. Next day, I might ask to review with a kid, help them review, but ideally I wouldn't wait that long. So particularly with kids struggling, kids on IEPs, any developmental delays, this technique can be a lifesaver, just a lifesaver for some kids. Parents often ask me, and I think very fairly, how do I remember to do all these reviews? One of the best ways to do it is just set a timer. I do that myself because I forget. Another thing I do is, especially if I've got the 4 quad cards and I'm working with a student, I just set it over to the side because it reminds me it's still in my peripheral view. It's there, we need to review it. So, and then even as I'm walking a kid to the door, walking them out of my office, I'm going to ask them. So if the word was metacognition, as I'm walking them out of my office, I'm saying to them again, tell me, what does metacognition mean? Or tell me the opposite of metacognition. So I'm just asking them, keep pulling that file out from time to time so you can remember. So don't wig out on me. I've had some moms get real upset with me on this. It's just like, it's a guideline, it's a suggestion. Bottom line is, if you were even to review, say you're working with your kid tonight or tomorrow on some homework and you covered some concept and they finished up their homework and the book is closed, and then maybe a few minutes later as they're brushing their teeth or having a snack, you just bring up the idea, what did they mean? What does that term metamorphosis mean again? Just again, pull it out one more time, give them that one more review. Oh, you have blessed their socks off. Hugely helpful to your child to bring it up and help them review it one more time. So these techniques I've showed you tonight, they're simple, they're free, but extremely, extremely powerful. And I would encourage you, if your child is getting frustrated, think about some of these techniques. Do they need more vocabulary enrichment and practice with the 4 quad cards? Maybe it is kind of an emotional thing right now with your kiddo, and you guys just need to talk about, how are they feeling? Are they ready to learn? Can they self-regulate? Are they struggling with self-regulating? How can they get back in the green? Maybe you guys need to have a brainstorm session where you talk about what would help you get back in the green. I see you're stressed. I get your stress. How could we help with this? Just talking about it is so helpful for most kids. Again, the space practice is good, and the making movies, fantastic. So that's a lot. Maybe pick one technique to play with in the next few days. And I know this is being recorded if that helps to review, but I'd encourage you to try one of these techniques with your kids. They're just so, so useful. So any questions about space practice? Brittany, did you have a question?
I did. I'm sorry. I didn't know if I turned it on or not.
I can hear you just
fine. I just had a question. When you're saying the space learning, like for the review thing, it would just be like for the test, like to go back over the review, to like just go over it in that amount of time, like the 20 minutes prior or whatever. That's like the review of the test, and then it's to stick a little bit more.
Yes, and it's hard to space practice is real deep, so I wouldn't want to do this with every concept that your child might be covering. That could just exhaust both of you. But if you know there's a few things that are really just not sticking,
just more challenging.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to go over that one
a vocabulary word, or if they're learning a second language, and the word, I'm not much of a language person, but you know, it just isn't sticking for them to
Mhm.
go in these intervals. And again, don't get all wigged out about, oh, I didn't do the 5-minute one. It's like, it's fine. If you just did 2 at any point that day, that would be incredible and really helpful for your kids. So when they're coming home each day, and you know, we have high school, ideally, if we could ask more, what did you learn? Tell me a word that you learned today, or a concept or an idea that you covered. And then now that I know that, I could ask more questions and ask. By just asking, I am reviewing with my kid, and they don't even hardly know it. They just think I'm talking and asking about their day. But I can get that, pull out the file again later and get them to review and solidify the term, the word, whatever it is they're studying.
Okay. All right. And I had one more question. My daughter, she says that she learns better if she's like watching something while she's studying. Is that a thing? Have you ever heard of that? Or do you think that that's just her wanting to do something else instead of
Yeah, I don't
doing
blame
her
her.
actual work?
I don't blame her. What the research says is we can't multitask. No one can multitask. Some people are really good. I used to be, I'm just getting old. I used to be a really good multitasker. And basically what you're doing is you're doing task A, and then you
Mhm.
stop a second, go to task B, go back to task A, move over to task C, and you do it so fast, you fool
Yeah.
yourself and other people, and you think you're multitasking. It's impossible. Brain's pretty, it's almost like a flashlight. That's how our attention is. I can only focus on something at a time. Yeah, and some people can really fool you, and some people just really are good at rapidly changing from one task to another. But no,
Yeah.
and I
No, you think that's a
applaud
bad
her for
choice.
trying to get by with that.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I didn't know if that's like a sign of some, like dyslexia or some kind of weird
I think she just
thing.
sounds tired and would rather do something fun. And I,
All right.
these kids have
Very
long
good.
days.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of homework.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Oh, definitely, Brittany. So let's do a quick, I'll take time for more questions, but let's do a quick, that again, just a minute. What do you remember about space practice? Can you remember the intervals? Can you remember why we're doing it? Remember that little bit of how quickly we forget on that forgetting curve? I think that's astonishing. Sobering, actually. So just let me give you a minute to write a few thoughts down. Okay, and I haven't given you a full 2 minutes, but you get the idea. Just give kids and yourself, if you're a student, or if you're a self-learner, just, yeah, you just read something, you just learned something. Close the dang book and see what you can pull out. That really lets you know what's sticking, what's not. Really helpful. You're kind of giving yourself a quiz, really. So we talked about with space practice that there is a schedule, 6 points of review. If you can get even a couple in, that helps kids so much. So when that book is closed after homework, at least don't tell your kid this, but in your head think, oh, we're not done yet. And if we can just chat while we're brushing our teeth or getting ready for bed to get that one more review on even one idea that they covered while they were doing their homework, super helpful. We talked about timers being a way to remember, or sitting things on your desk. I tell parents, those four quad cards, I'll say, once you've reviewed them with your child for that day, then ask them to take the cards and put it on their pillow. That will remind both of you just before bed, let's review our vocabulary again. So just little ways to remind yourself to, yeah, let's talk about it again. Let's review one more time. So just wrapping up now, we talked about 4 techniques tonight: the self-regging with the thermometer, the 4 quad cards, making movies, and then finally space practice. Again, you'll notice these techniques are not complicated, not rocket science. And even though you may not have read your child's textbook or book, you can, but just some of these questions and strategies can be super helpful. I mean, I have taught kids in biochem and calculus. I have never taken either course in my life, but I teach them these strategies, and using that material, I get them to study better. They can get better grades with these techniques. They're super, super powerful. One more review. What is this? I bet somebody said it.
Metacognition.
Yes, metacognition, and it meant
Thinking about your thinking.
thinking about your thinking. So do you see how I space practice that through the workshop? Just to show you this is what I mean. And we're talking about one thing, but we take a quick break and just review, and then we get back to that, whatever it is we were working on. Okay. So final round of questions.
I do have a quick question for you. I heard you talk quite a bit about how terrible the curricula is written all over the place. Is there any curricula that you actually do think is written well, or is it pretty much all garbage?
This is being recorded, huh? Can that suffice as my answer? I do. I scratched my head. I think these people have PhDs. They took the same courses I took. It's like, that's such a no-no. Not to review, not to teach kids about these concepts, about this is really how we learn, this is a good way to study. I think schools should teach study skills courses. They used to. That is just, I don't hear about that anymore. And I think it's to our kids' detriment. But of course, it's not an excuse, the poorly written curricula. And I'm just saying to you as parents, it's like, so your kids, it's really, a lot of this is not their fault. It's just poorly written. And when it's poorly written, you can go with me right here. It's probably going to be poorly taught, because we base our teaching on the book. So there's some fantastic master teachers out there. I've seen them, and they know better. They don't rely super heavily on the textbook. They bring in other things. They've got visuals, they do small groups, they know their YouTube videos they like to help kids appreciate concepts. They teach them how to review, they teach them how to annotate, the writing on a book, and how to talk to an author through annotation. That's another wonderful strategy. But those are those master teachers, and it's not because they're using the textbook well, it's because they're master teachers and they really know how to teach. So yeah, my 2 cents. I think most of it is very poorly written. I'm just shocked sometimes. And I hope as parents, that's just kind of gives you some relief, like, yeah, I bet my kid is trying. I bet this is hard. I bet I'd find it hard, given how quickly they expect kids after one brush through to know these terms, and we didn't get to play with them or handle them at all. Yeah, some of that's definitely what's going on.
I totally agree with that. Some of the homework questions I've read for my kids, and I just think, I'm not the smartest person, but I'm not stupid. And this question is making me feel stupid because you read it over and over and over again, and it just does not make any sense. And how are they going to expect an 8-year-old to figure out this master riddle of a math question?
Yeah. And those story problems in particular, oh my gosh.
Absolutely.
And they're so decontextualized. I don't really have the full story. I don't know even why I want to know this. Yeah, it's amazing the kids put out sometimes, I think, as much as they do, because it's sort of nonsensical. Yeah, the brain loves story, the brain needs context, and so often we're talking and asking at this, what we call decontextualized. There's nothing around this, like you said, this story problem or this math problem for an 8-year-old. There's just, it just seems so random and not connected to anything. It's mind-boggling.
Right.
Oh.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to spend this with us. And I mean, even tonight, I was able to help my daughter completely different on a math problem that I wouldn't have even thought of before. So I just really appreciate you.
Oh, I appreciate you. That's awesome. Wow. Talk about taking it and running with it. Good job.
I tried.
Wow. That's fantastic. Thank you. That makes my night that already somebody
Oh.
using this stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Right. Let me just show that last slide. It had the QR codes if you're interested. So there's 3 levels to the program. It's actually this Wowza Brain, the 3rd level. I work on reading speed, working memory, processing speed is how fast can I think. Super, super important to reading and all thinking. But the first week actually on the Master Books Academy is the company that has it up. First week's free. And so you could just get a feel for it and just see if you're at all interested. As you can see from my workshop tonight, I am an unusual, I don't know, teacher thinker. I don't approach this like other teachers because it's just like, no, forget the curricula. I want brain. What does the brain research say? So my method is really unique. I use a metronome, for example, in this course, and kids have to respond very rapidly. And they play games and they have to respond super rapidly. And that's what builds fluency and comprehension. So, and this is my contact information if anybody would like to contact me. I know that a lady had a question about her son and writing. And that's it for tonight.
Thank you so much, Bridget. And if you guys do want to work with Bridget, we do have money that we can help you guys with for her tutoring or her assessments. So reach out to her and then, she'll work with us and we'll figure it out for you guys. But excellent class. Great information. I think everybody really got a lot out of that. And thank you so much for taking the time and being here with us tonight.
Oh,
Yes, thank you so much.
pleasure. I love working with parents. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great. And we do have to do, we have a survey and we're going to do attendance, but Bridget, you don't have to stay on because we're going to be a couple more minutes. So thank you.